go. So welcome everyone to our Day of Social Justice with a special focus on AI. This event is hosted by the American Library Association Social Responsibilities Roundtable, or SRRT. SRRT believes that libraries and librarians must center social responsibility by recognizing and helping to solve social problems and inequities to work for the common good. My name is Olivia Blake, my pronouns are she, her, and I will be moderating today's session. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to review some housekeeping. First, to enable captions, click More in the bottom right of the screen and then click Show Captions. Our session today is being recorded and the recording will be available on our website within a few weeks. Please keep your cameras and microphones off unless you're a presenter or posing a question during our Q&A portion. Please be respectful and extend care and compassion to yourself and to others. And we will have time for questions and answers after all of the presentations have concluded, but please use the Q&A Zoom feature to pose your questions and reserve the chat section to relay any tech issues, resource shareouts, or appreciation for our panelists. You can enter your questions into the Q&A as the presentations are rolling. You do not need to wait until they're completed with their presentations to do so. So if you have a burning question and you don't want to forget, just drop it in there and we will get to it during the Q&A portion. So without any further ado, this session focuses on critical resistance and the impact of generative AI on human creativity and information literacy. Our presenters are, we've got John Schoenfelder, Reference Coordinator and Undergraduate Services Librarian from Washington State University. We'll be discussing creativity and generative AI, what we could lose and what we could find. Caterina Reed, Academic Engagement Librarian from Stony Brook University, will be speaking on using generative AI to teach critical information literacy. And Alison, Macrina, Director of Library Freedom Project, will be speaking on resources and community building for critical AI resistance in libraries. So with that, I will turn things over to John to get us started with the first presentation.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say also just thank you to this whole affair. It's been really remarkable, all the different presentations. So I definitely, I really love what I've heard so far, and I hope I can contribute something valuable to that. As I was introduced, my name is John Schoenfelder. I am a reference coordinator and an undergraduate services librarian at University of Washington Pullman campus. And today I'm talking about creativity and generative AI. Here, an image of an artist reaching towards some paint, but then in the next image we have a scientist. This is Chanel Case Borden at the National Cancer Institute reaching for some vials, and I believe it is a PMC test. So I'm trying to think, and my focus will largely be on things like visual arts. But I want to open our ideas to thinking about creativity very broadly, because I think a lot of the things that I'll be talking about when it comes to the visual arts will be widely applicable when it comes to things like the sciences or any other kinds of forms of human activity. So I'm going to start by framing a little bit about creativity, then we'll think about a cross-section of social concerns and artificial creativity, and then finally a couple of takeaways that I hope that we'll have about applying creativity to generative AI use or our decision not to use them. I think that if we are going to be open about the question of using generative AI, that one of the answers has to be that we decide not to use it because it doesn't meet our needs or because it doesn't suit our values well compared to other options. There's a distinction that I'd like to make sort of early on to be able to go and sort of focus on what I'll be talking about primarily. And that, I think, is a big difference between thinking about generative AI and computer-generated art in general, compared to some of the specific consumer tools that I think are being heavily advertised today. So here I have a Moth Glitch by Eric Salvaggio, where he goes and uses the idea of Gaussian noise, which are a part of these diffusion models, in order to create glitches within image creating generative AI systems, and trying to use that as a way to think about what generative AI means for our vision of the world or our social connection to the creation of art. And then underneath that, I have the Fragmentarium by Michael Pidvelt Christensen. It is an elaborate fractally generated in computer environment, which involves a lot of really complex computing resources to generate this object within a computer sort of virtual space, and then to go and navigate it as a visual medium. These are engaging with AI, engaging with computer systems as a medium by which we can go and investigate things like human expression or our social and cultural conditions. And that, I think, is a very different kind of thing than what we're talking about when we talk about a lot of the commercial generative AI products. Things like Copilot, Claude. Sono AI is a diffusion model that takes natural language prompts and then goes and generates 3 or 4 kind of poppy 2.5-minute songs based on your prompt. Midjourney and DALL-E are both very popular diffusion models for taking natural language prompts and then creating images. So I am going to be focusing on that suite of commercial products, which I think people are going to be more generally familiar with. So defining creativity is actually kind of a tough thing because we have many different intuitive senses for what creativity means, like the creation of something new, or making something new when there wasn't something before, or doing something in a way that might be unusual or unexpected, but has this kind of like click moment that we have in recognizing that it actually is like a really great way to do something. It's worth maybe breaking down creativity into a typology. So Kaufman and Bagetto gave us sort of broke out small c versus big C, and then further broke them out into mini C. That would be creativity in the individual learning. So if you go and get like a plot of clay in front of someone who's never really worked with clay before, they're going to engage with that in a creative process. It will be a part of their learning using that material. Little c is creativity in our everyday life. So that would be like the way that you do your hair, or the way that you cook your breakfast. There are moments of creativity and useful acts of creativity within the everyday life sphere. Pro C is creativity in expert trained tasks. And so on the one hand, your expertise gives you a lot of a wider range of options in some regards for how you can go and use that expertise in that creative work. On the other hand, that expertise training comes with professional constraints, which can often go and also close down the possibility for creativity in different spaces. And then finally, big C creativity is sort of like that really big sort of like very positive idea of like creativity that is a world-changing or a culture-changing implication to it. Another thing that I think I found very useful when it comes to thinking about creativity is comparing problem finding to problem solving in creativity. A lot of this research came out from the 60s about how artists, when they were going and performing in graduate school, the way that they saw them performing creatively in their graduate work was less about solving problems and more about finding deeper, more sophisticated, or more complex problems within the work that they were already doing. And there's been some recent research that within a certain margin in its meta-analysis has found that creativity is related closely to the idea of problem finding as opposed to problem solving, which is various processes for discovering, identifying, or defining problems. So I want to go and put out some 3 major premises with the idea of learning creative skills. Basically, we learn by doing things. Even when we fail to do the thing that we try to do, we are learning something. We're learning things about the particular medium or the particular material that we're working with. And what we learn isn't something that happens by a single action, but it's actually something that we would learn over a period of time, and things that we repeat the actions that we do in order to learn them. We also learn by how we do the things that we do. So the process that we use in order to create things actually changes what it is that we learn about that process or about that act. And different tools will teach us different skills. So we might go and say that we're, learning how to play an instrument, but the differences between these different instruments can go and really change the kinds of skills that we're learning. So if you're learning how to play the piano, there are going to be some things that are transferable to, say, learning how to play the saxophone. But there are some very nuanced differences between those kinds of skills, even though we might look at them as being, making music. They do them in different ways, and what we learn as we do them also very different. Also, and I think that this is really important when it comes to thinking about AI in our processes, is that we don't learn what we offload. Basically, if we go and decide that a part of our process isn't something that we're actually going to be involved or engaged in while we do it, we're not going to be learning those kinds of skills that are related to that thing. And when we go and take skills that we don't have and we go and we or skills that we do have and we offload them to different kinds of systems, including AI systems, we go and we can see a degradation in our skills as we proceed along. And some skills degrade faster than other skills. Some skills are sort of more general, and so you might actually be practicing them more regularly than you might think, whereas other skills might be more specialized, and so those would often degrade faster. Creativity in AI, it's something that a lot of people are thinking of. The MIT Technology Review put out a special issue about creativity in AI, and also recently the Journal of Creativity, which is specifically about design and innovation, has also put out a special issue on AI and creativity. I think librarians interact with patrons, we interact with each other, and we interact with the profession in ways that really can foster creativity, or in many ways require creativity. And so we should see ourselves as a part of this conversation to make sure that we're also sharing librarian values and incorporating our perspectives to the wider cultural question. So I'm going to go and think about sort of a cross section of a couple of social concerns that I see when we think about using these generative AI products, basically these consumer models, and incorporating them into some creative processes. So the first thing that I would say is that generative AI teaches users how to write prompts, but not how to create. That there is a useful and important distinction between the two of those things. The skills that we learn when we go and we interact with, say, like a Copilot chat or a chat bot or something that's going to take in our natural language prompts and go and do something with them, we're not really communicating with this system. What we're doing is providing it with a series of language material that the system will then go and tokenize. And then depending on how that system is designed, it will use those tokens to go and perform its activity. And so even when we're thinking about using AI like as an AI art, we're actually not performing the activity of doing the generating that this generative system is. Instead, it has to actually sort of cut apart what we're going to do and perform that activity that we're asking it to perform. So when we think about developing skills for AI, we're really not developing very sophisticated skills at all. We're writing out a prompt and then allowing an AI system to digest, process, and then create outputs based on it. So instead of going and having workers or having artists use the very sophisticated and meaning-rich skills that they develop as they work or as they create, workers are open to being reduced to essentially a series of typing skills, being able to go and put in language into these prompts. And that can lead to a lot of problems when it comes to the intensification of work. Oftentimes it's sort of hyped up that that AI can save you a lot of time. But the question is, what will that time that we save actually afford either workers or organizations? And in a lot of cases, it's been, as we've heard from some previous presentations, an intensification of work. So instead of having more free time to be able to, pursue things that are of value to people, we actually will be, it seems, working more or less the same amount of hours, but now more intensely, because the skills that we have to bring to the particular task that we're performing are being minimized to the point where they can then be filled in sort of, as intensely and as compactly as possible. I'd also say that users learn to rely on generative AI outputs And the problem that that can cause is that the biases that those AI outputs have, from the various stages of those systems creation, those remain. And as we rely on the generative AI outputs, say, to create pieces of art, because we don't feel like we have the art skills to be able to perform those, the creation of that art ourselves, we become reliant on the outputs, and that goes and keeps us sort of locked into the biases that are present within these systems. So this is an example image from a Midjourney user that's present on Midjourney's preview page. And next to it, I've included the prompt that was used to generate, it was about 30-second video of a handsome young man standing next to his beautiful wife, both smiling warmly. And something that I think that is worth sort of thinking deeply about the images that are created when we go and put in these prompts is that there are no indications of race and there are no indications of class that are put into the prompt. But because of different word associations that can be generated either by word associations that are present within like the statistical relationship between different tokens. Also, because humans are in the loop when it comes to training these different models, it may be that a human sees an output of a particular prompt and gives it a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on their individual perception of that output. And so there is also another opportunity for bias to be ingrained into how these systems operate and thereby reproduce images. And so, when we think about going and building skills while we're creating, we're not just building the mechanical skills or the eye-hand coordination or the relationship to materials, we're also potentially practicing things like cultural competence and encountering cultural practices or cultural images that are important for our development of those kinds of cultural skills. And if we're reliant on the outputs of AI in order to go and give us the piece of art that we're going to use, say for a library program advertisement or say for a slideshow, we might actually be locking ourselves into biases that we are not developing the skills in order to recognize and be able to address properly or meaningfully in our work. Finally, Gen AI handles all of the material. Users don't create, they consume. And this, I think, is a major issue when it comes to using generative AI art, is that it develops a consumer culture. And you can definitely point to, cultures in the global north in terms of the consumer culture, but AI is just exacerbating this consumer culture where we're devaluing the work and the workers, and instead reducing our relationship to art and artists into just a pure commodity. That the things that it goes into, not just the time and the effort, but also the cultural practices, the cultural relationships, and the matters of personal expression, that those things are sort of being flattened out and sort of set aside for what it is that we're getting when we ask AI to do it. We go to AI to ask it to give us something, and it gives it to us, rather than being involved in a creative process where there is someone who is creating something, engaging with this creative work and sharing that with us, whether that is for pay or as a part of our cultural process. And I would just want us to point out that we are writers, artists, and musicians, that for that this is a process that we are all engaged in, and we could engage ourselves in it more. That writers are people, and artists are people, and musicians are people, and that we share in the same basic relationships with art and creation that people who are at the peak of their craft would be. The difference may be that they spent time with developing those skills, or that they might have a cultural connection with particular forms of art where they'd be able to develop those abilities more rigorously. So just a couple of things that I'd really want to have us sort of take away from thinking about AI and creativity is that you value your process. Which is to say, when you have people talk to you about how you just need to play with AI, or you just need to go in and see how you can go in integrate it into your process, or you know, we're thinking about implementation. How do we implement this into what we do? When we think about artists think very deeply about their process, and what their process does changes not just how they create the work that they create, but also what its meaning is, or how it connects them to, you know, the shared process of learning those skills, or the people that they would share the result of their artwork with. And so thinking about the process is something that I think is really vitally important. You know, even if you're just going in and thinking about like, well, I want to do a research project, and so that will involve brainstorming. Well, I think that there might be some, you know, there's an awful lot of talk about how AI is really great for brainstorming, and I think that you can see how they result in a lot of different ideas that are generated very quickly. And when we look at that, we think, oh, okay, this is a really great form of brainstorming. But brainstorming is also a cognitive process that you engage in that isn't just about going and how do I slap together as many different ideas as I can, but actually, what do I know about this, about the subject or about this material, and how can I go and think about areas where I have interest, or that I want to know more about, or what are things that are gaps, things that don't really appear apparent, but as I start to think about it now, this might actually be a useful or valuable thing to pursue. And so thinking about offloading brainstorming entirely to AI is really losing out on an opportunity for us to actually develop the kinds of skills that you develop when you go through brainstorming. Something that I think is pretty important is also to embrace vulnerability, which is to say, a lot of the times when we go and we think as individual workers or individual creators, when it goes into that creative process, is that the judgment of other people definitely looms large as you're both creating whatever it is you're creating, but then also when you go out and actually, you know, provide it, share it with people and show them. And oftentimes how I have heard people talk about using AI is that they don't have the skills that they need in order to be able to share this kind of art. And I would say embrace vulnerability, because that is how you learn skills, and that's also how you connect with people, because I think just about everyone feels vulnerable at different points in their life. And then finally, connecting with others and fostering their creativity instead of going and relying on an AI network to be able to go and you know, be your back and forth or be your feedback. If you become a part of someone else's feedback network, you provide them the feedback for their experience. They can provide you with feedback from their experience. That actually goes and allows you to create a really dynamic and meaningfully caring community, as opposed to just being sort of cordoned off with AI. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for everyone giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Next up, we have Caterina Reed.
Hey, everyone. John, thank you so much for that presentation. I briefly go over visual literacy and images, so I thank you for that presentation. So let me share my slides. Oh, okay, there we go. We're good? All right. So hi, everyone. Welcome again to this session. I'll be talking about using generative AI to teach critical information literacy. Again, my name is Caterina Reed. I use she, her pronouns. And in addition to my previous introduction, I would just like to add that I identify as a multiracial, neurodivergent, cisgender woman. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope we can continue learning from each other as we have the rest of today. So for this presentation, I will begin first with discussing critical information literacy and why it is important. I will also talk about how the credit-bearing course that I created came into fruition and the aims of that course. The remainder of the presentation will be focused on how I integrated generative AI tools and class discussions surrounding AI bias. Oh, went backwards. Here we go. So first, many of us may already know this, but let's go over what exactly critical information literacy is. According to Drabinsky and Toole, they define critical information literacy as a theory and practice that considers the socio-political dimensions of information and production of knowledge. And it critiques the ways in which systems of power shape the creation, distribution, and reception of information. According to Doherty, critical information literacy is a form of activism that asks students to step outside their paradigms and look for other voices. So in other words, that's a lot of words and definitions, but in other words, critical information literacy acknowledges that libraries and knowledge production processes are not neutral, right? With this in mind, I felt it was necessary to teach ways for students to interrogate knowledge production and traditional information literacy instruction. Coincidentally, last year, there was a call for faculty to create new courses, and I felt I could make a strong case for a 3-credit library course to be taught focused on critical information literacy. The Provost's office and Stony Brook's curriculum committee agreed, and they approved my proposal to teach a course last fall 2024, with the objective of teaching undergraduate students to understand the social and political nature of information. While constructing this syllabus, I knew it was important to cover many, many important topics to me, and these concepts included information privilege, citation justice, epistemic injustice, and searching for marginalized voices within archives. My aim for my students was to become critical consumers of information and hopefully identify gaps and misconceptions in information and the web, as well as discover alternate ways of accessing and sharing information. This is just a snapshot of the first page of the syllabus. So to give you an idea of the course, this is the breakdown of the weekly topics that I taught during the semester. Initially, we were only going to spend a week on AI, and when I initially envisioned the course, I didn't really think AI was going to take up much of the course, but we ended up spending a lot more time on how to use AI tools and issues of AI bias more than I had originally anticipated, just because of, data privacy and privacy literacy, misinformation, disinformation. It just became natural to bring in the issues of AI bias. And I felt it was necessary, given our current moment, to review these topics and ensure that my students were not only comfortable using AI tools, but also with critiquing them and understanding the implications of using such tools. So for this class, I invited a variety of guest speakers who would come to my class and lead conversations related to the week's assigned topic. And due to the availability of my guest speakers, I had to shift some topics around than I had originally envisioned. So rather than spending like 2 whole chunks exclusively on AI, my students were introduced to AI both at the beginning and towards the end of the semester. And it was nice to see actually their knowledge of generative AI grow over time. So at the beginning of the semester, we watched the film Coded Bias, and we also read Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Sophia Noble. Both the book and the film look at how women and people of color, specifically Black people, are negatively impacted by AI and algorithmic bias. Coded Bias, if you have not seen it, is an excellent film, and it looks into issues of facial recognition software and how it's weaponized against people of color. So it was not until a few weeks later that we decided to try out AI tools, and this just happened to coincide with the 2024 US presidential elections, which will become relevant in a little bit. Our first activity was to look at several generative AI tools and evaluate what each of these tools could be used for, as well as the pros and cons of each of the tools. So my students, if you do this with your students, you can choose any, but I specifically used Perplexity, ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Crayon, DALL-E, Canva, Magic, Design, Claude, and Suno. The issues with a lot of these tools, as you know, was brought up this morning as well, is the cost of these tools as well. So even if you know, you could get a free version of the tool, and then next week it's like, oh, you have to pay whatever amount to be able to use the tool. So luckily I was able to use these tools with my students, at least the free version with them, and have them investigate what these tools can do. So after they investigated each of the tools and figured out what each of them could be used for, I asked them to create a piece of disinformation using one of them. And most of the groups found it easier to use ChatGPT. And even though they ended up relatively using the same tool, they were all able to create a piece of misinformation that differed from other groups. Some tried to create images, which didn't come out as well because there are other generative AI tools, as John mentioned, that are better with images than ChatGPT. And some created news stories. For example, one group talked about a news story covering the winner of the 2024 presidential race, even though the race had not been called, that they had created a news story. I asked them to reflect if they found that what they created was convincing, and if they would be able to fool others with their creation. And then part of the conversation was also reflecting on if misinformation and disinformation should be allowed to be created in the first place. And so this led to many interesting conversations with students concerned about AI bias and the fact that people should not be allowed to create disinformation. But on the other hand, others concerned about intellectual freedom, and that the problem was that people didn't have the literacy or the training necessary to determine if the information they were looking at was AI generated or not. So conflicting opinions from my students. We also discussed the limitations and possible improvements that these generative AI tools have made. For example, which tools were better at representing people of color when generating images. And John mentioned that also in his presentation about reflecting, right, what we think of, when we generate images or even text, that there is a bias that, what are we actually displaying, right, when we're using these tools, or perpetuating biases, right? We also briefly discussed environmental impacts such as cobalt mining in Democratic Republic of Congo. So I allowed my students to be as reflective as possible and kind of bring up issues that really were important to them. And we talked about that in class. And I should say I had the privilege of teaching a 3-credit course. So if I didn't address something that week, I could address it the next week. And that's really what's so great about having dedicated time to cover these issues. So the following class, I decided to challenge my students even further by having them perform an AI and visual literacy activity. And this class day was 2 days after the election. And I got this idea of this visual literacy and generative AI activity from Miami University in Ohio. And I really put my hat off to the folks who created that activity. If anybody is interested in the link to that toolkit, I'm happy to share. I modified one of the lesson plans a bit, and I gave each group different images of paintings and asked them to create an alternate version of the image using a free AI image generator tool, like Deep AI's Dreamscape generator. And I asked them to try to fool their classmates into thinking that the AI remixed version of the image was the real one. And so once they were done, we went around the room and tried to determine which image was real and which one was fake. And there was one image in particular that was so difficult that no one got it right, and it made everybody laugh. And this happened to be an image that was not surreal, but not a realistic painting, right? So we know that generative AI struggles a bit with realistic photos, but they really enjoyed that one, and it made everybody laugh. And I bring this up for 2 reasons. One, it was an activity that was lighthearted enough that those who were still reeling from the elections could focus on and just learn something from. Some of my students came in to class looking like they were crying, but they were still able to enjoy and laugh during this activity. And secondly, they learned, which was the learning objective of the day, the importance of copyright and how artists are being impacted by these AI image generator tools. And we talked about the importance of, not the importance of copyright and also the use of Midjourney in creating the comic book Zaraya and the Dawn, as well as how artists are fighting back using the data poisoning tool, Nightshade. So, my students came into class thinking, oh, what's Caterina going to have us do today? And they ended up leaving with all of these issues that they're struggling with, because some of them are also creators as well, right? And so now they're thinking, how is my work going to be impacted by generative AI? Okay. So I'm going to leave out my contact info up here, but one of my intentions of this class was to teach students how bias exists in information, and that includes AI-generated information, be it textual or visual. And allowing my students to use AI tools in the classroom, having them reflect on their use of it, illustrated issues of bias, privilege, and the myth of neutrality. And so while there are numerous issues with generative AI, from environmental costs and copyright disputes, I feel that students can learn about these problems by using generative AI in a critical way and having conversations to reflect on why and how they should be using these tools. So I'm going to stop here, but happy to discuss any questions in the Q&A. And I just have, okay. Last but not least, I would be remiss to not mention Alison, who's speaking next. She was one of the guest speakers that I invited to come to Stony Brook and speak to my students about anti-doxing. She does amazing work, and I will let her take it away.
Thank you so much, Caterina, and thanks for putting your email up on the screen. I'll just mention now, if any of our presenters would like to continue the conversation with folks after, please feel free to drop your email address in the chat. And now I will turn things over to Alison Macrina.
Thanks, Olivia, and thank you so much, Caterina, for that comment. I really loved coming to speak to your class, and I love what you're doing with your critical info, lit, and resistance. Hey, everybody. Let me start with a little link to, it's got my slides and a few of the resources I'm going to talk about. I have a QR code at the end too, if you somehow would prefer that means of receiving it. But everything I'm going to talk about is there. You're welcome. Happy to. I know it's been a long day, so anything that we can do to help everybody follow along. Let me go ahead and share my slides. I'm also going to turn my video off just for bandwidth preservation purposes. Just 1 second while I get my stuff up here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the work we do in Library Freedom Project toward building community against a lot of the issues that have been brought up today. My name is Alison Macrina. I am the director of Library Freedom Project. I use she, her pronouns. Library Freedom Project is building a community of practice for library workers who are interested in critical resistance to exploitative technology. We work on things like education, community building, resource development, and just bringing together library workers who have shared values against these systems, and trying to come up with ways to respond in our library environments that can address the many problems. I'm a longtime AI hater, so I just want to be very clear about my positionality here. This is not going to be a nuanced talk at all. I think that so many of today's panelists have been amazing at setting up the problems here, describing various aspects of the AI crisis, but I want to just get a little bit more in depth with a couple of those aspects. We definitely don't have time to cover all of them. We're really only scratching the surface, But this is our approach in LFP, some of the key issues that are behind our need to resist. So our position, as I said, I'm a known AI hater. We're pretty opposed to AI as both a marketing gimmick, as a political and ideological project. And for me, it comes back to this idea of the poly crisis. I think probably many of you have encountered this term before. Essentially, what it means is we find ourselves in a moment of multiple and intersecting crises. There are conditions that not only threaten our work as information stewards, but our very existence and future on this planet. AI, taken as an ideological project with some technological components, but primarily as a political and ideological project, amplifies those crisis conditions and serves the powerful few who created the polycrisis and who benefit from it. The conditions of polycrisis that I refer to are numerous, but some of them include global fascism, the concentration of power into a few private companies, the concentration of wealth into a few private individuals, the ongoing privatization of any remaining public life, the exacerbation of the climate crisis and AI in particular's acceleration of resource consumption, and the worsening socio-technological inequities that include things like surveillance, mis and disinformation, etc. And as I said already, this really only scratches the surface of the problems. Um, Please take this meme that I made, by the way, that doesn't really have to do with the polycrisis, but I just felt very inspired to make it. I want to just take a moment to go deeper on some of the ideological and political pieces of this problem. As I said already, it's often said by AI critics that AI is not a technical or technological project so much as it's an ideological project, right? And I think that the test creole framework is a really useful one to understand those political and ideological dimensions. So test creole was developed by the AI critics Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres as a way of framing the relationship between so-called artificial intelligence and techno-fascist ideologies. Many of the core proponents of these ideologies, and I'm going to get into in brief, are principles of major tech companies, venture capital, artificial intelligence, includes people like Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, and those are just to name a few of the major principles. So what is test creole? I have it explained here, but just to go over it a little bit. So, transhumanism and extropianism are both kind of based on this idea that that human species can be re-engineered into a superior new race of post-humans. It sounds eugenic because it is eugenic. Singularitarianism is based on the idea that the singularity is something that we want, that it's a good thing, that when the pace of technological development exceeds human comprehension, we will achieve some kind of utopia. Cosmism is is sort of part of the like techno spiritual dimension of this, right? The idea of artificial general intelligence, things like uploading your mind to a database, human beings becoming merged with technology. It gets into these eugenic ideas, but there's a more sort of, there's a cosmic element to it. Rationalist ideology is the idea that basically that you can use math to solve social problems, and that math is way better at determining ethics than any kind of social approach. Effective altruism is I've got Sam Bankman-Fried paraphrase here, the idea that you should make as much money as possible so that you can donate it to charity or do positive things with it, but it's seen as a rational approach to wealth hoarding. And then long-termism finally is the idea that the most rational thing that we could do is ignore the problems of today so that potential future people could be happy in this singularity utopia in a massive computer simulation or whatever. And so this ideology is popular. As I said, many of the principals of these companies believe in it, at least in some component. And it is an animating force behind a lot of the ideological vision of artificial intelligence. As a component of the political project, we see some of this reflected in the landscape of AI technologies, that the major tech companies are what dominate the entire value chain. This is a chart from the AI Now Institute's AI Landscape Report 2025, which I really recommend. It's quite long, but it's really good reading for sort of looking at a lot of these issues in an applied sense. And basically, it's exactly what it looks like, right? That the major tech companies are what are dominating this environment. They stand to benefit the most from it. They're the reason why we're experiencing so much of this hype cycle. I wanted to start by thinking about some of these problems in a kind of zoomed out way. But now I want to zoom in a little bit and think about how we experience some of the AI hype environment in libraries. Um, we're in this current moment where a lot of AI hype has captured many in library work. And we see a tremendous amount of uncritical adoption of AI. And these are the kind of categories that I see the uncritical adoption happening in, right? So the first one is inevitability, this idea that AI is going to happen whether we like it or not, that we don't have any control. And so we should just go along because history is determined by technology and not by humans, right? FOMO, very popular library attitude, fear of missing out. The idea that if we don't uncritically adopt these tools, that we'll be left behind, that we'll lose our relevance. We see a lot of this kind of goalpost shifting or method of ignoring the very real problems with AI by saying something along these lines, right? Like, okay, well, you mentioned all these problems with AI, but what about AI for blank, right? Some ostensible good whataboutism that ignores very real problems. And kind of related to that one is this idea of speaking to the sort of revolutionary future potential. I think this gets back to some of the components of the test Creole ideology, which is like, sure, there are problems with the current environment of AI adoption, with its massive resource extraction and consumption, et cetera. But won't it be good for the future thing that will make all of this worth it? And then the last one that I see the most in the library world is just this sort of resignation of like, my job is really hard. I don't have the support that I need to do the work that I'm required to do. And so AI makes that easier. And I think one of the things that's contained in this argument is the idea that collective labor power is not possible. And so all we can do is do more with less and allow ourselves to be exploited and use some tools that maybe will soften the blow a little bit, but that it sort of denies the structural reality and the necessity of collective organizing because those things feel impossible. In the tools themselves that we're seeing pushed on us by various library vendors, there are a number of different issues that I think are reflective of some of the broader issues with AI tools out in the world, right? And the first one is reproducibility. The tools that we're being sold, that we can't get them to come up with the same answer over and over again. This gets into the second issue, which is about transparency and autonomy. We don't know how AI tools are getting to their conclusions, so we can't do proper information literacy. We don't actually know how the outputs have come through, and it's as I said, related to this issue of reproducibility as well. It's been said already by many other panelists on today's event, the various biases and inaccuracies that come through in AI generated output. And then with regard to uh, the use in, as students and other patrons, people just passively accepting output, sort of like techno-deterministic, accepting what the machine puts forward without having a critical approach to it. And then finally, we could be here all day talking about the issues with energy usage and long-term sustainability. I think that, as I've already said, we're not going to be able to get into all of the issues, not even with this whole day devoted to talking about critiques of AI. But I think that it's really important to push back against the AI hype that wants you to believe in this bold possible future, that the bold future outweighs the current harms. But that's not what is happening. What's happening is AI is doing what it's designed to do. The things that are wrong with it are part of its existential reality, and that these are not minor concerns that can be worked out with different kinds of tweaks or reforming to various systems, but they're existential issues and are really purposeful. I want to shift just a little bit, and I realize that I'm probably already running out of time, but I want to just pose a couple questions for the chat, because one of the things we're working on in LFP is a user survey for library workers to ask about their concerns with AI. What are the things that you are worried about in your library work environment, in your life, in your local organizing context? It might be some of the things I've brought up already. It might be things that have come up with other panelists. I'm really interested in just hearing what people have to say about this, and I would welcome having a little more of this discussion during the Q&A period if there's interest in that. And likewise, what questions do you wish were being asked about AI in your library context? If you're in an environment where there is this sort of uncritical adoption happening, or where the conversation is very boosterish, what do you want to, what do you wish was being discussed that's not? So I would love to take a look at the outputs to those questions in the chat after I finish up here. But I want to get to the second half of my talk, which refers to the title, right? Community building for resistance. I want to talk about what resistance actually can look like and some of the approach that we take in Library Freedom Project. So the first one is that I think it's incredibly important for us to try to poison the well. That the hype narratives are very powerful, but we can have an equally powerful counter narrative. In fact, I think a much more powerful counter narrative, because as people know what AI is and how it works, their skepticism grows. And there's a great study that was just cited about this. I actually don't have this on the resource list, so if you want to find it, take a screenshot of that. The more people know about AI, the more that they are skeptical of it and wish to resist it. Other ways to resist the hype: when possible, we should be taking public critical stances. If anyone went to ALA, you might have noticed that there was an enormous amount of hype and boosterism, and most of the talks were completely uncritical. The vendor approach was completely uncritical. We had a panel on AI that was pretty critical, and we maxed out our capacity of the largest room that you can get. And they asked us to host it a second day. People in our profession are really hungry for this critical stance, and more of us who are in the position to take it need to be taking it. We should be arming ourselves in these conversations with different talking points for resistance, knowing who our audience is and knowing what kinds of things move them. So, for example, talking to young people, the climate arguments are something that younger folks are typically interested in. If you hear the argument about, making your job easier, I think it's a really good way to inoculate people against the exploitation that they're facing as a worker, the demand in more productivity for no increase in wages. One resource that we have in LFP that speaks to this kind of like narrative resistance, we have a resource for AI talking points that just gets in a little bit of detail about different audiences and what might move them on these issues. It's two-sided, and I've just got screenshots of each side here. One of them has those sort of example talking points, and then one of them gets at some of the kind of ethical issues of AI, why we're resistant to these technologies and ideologies. Another really important thing is to, as you become the person to respond to these narratives, um, you can be such a valuable tool for resistance just by knowing how to ask questions and being willing to be the annoying person at the staff meeting or wherever. Another resource that we made in LFP is this guide for asking vendors questions about AI, and I've just screenshotted a little bit of it here. Even though this is vendor focused, it can be really useful in a lot of different kinds of conversations. And we organize the questions categorically. So you can see it's like basic functions of the tool. What does it do? Why do I need it? Environmental issues, labor, and so on. Uh, Getting ourselves um, responsive to the hype narrative requires us to know what these issues are. And so one of the things in the resource list that I shared is a bunch of things that have helped us in LFP to like really hone uh, our talking points and our responses to AI hype. So we have a bunch of books listed. Love, Blood in the Machine by Brian Merchant, The AI Con by Alex Hanna and Emily M. Bender, Resisting AI by Dan McQuillan. There's a bunch more on the list. A few great podcasts, including Tech Won't Save Us, and various other media and newsletters. Katie already mentioned 404 Media. I'll also add Where's Your Ed At newsletter. Media Justice's Tech Broligarchy series gets a lot into the political dimensions of this. There's so much good material being made by AI critics and a lot of it is really accessible, even if this is all 101 information for you. Um, I think that as library workers, there's so much opportunity for us to be offering programming and materials for our patrons. People want to know about this stuff. They have skepticism. They have an interest. They see the way that it is being pushed on them in various forms. I think there's a lot of attention right now to the impact of data centers on local communities. And so other things in that resource list include some community organizing resources that we really like in LFP. The AI Now Institute Roadmap for Action is awesome. It's about making the fight against AI one about power. The Kairos resource on fighting data centers has a lot of really good organizing tips. And we'll be working on a few more kind of organizing and patron education resources. If you are like, oh my God, this is where I want to be, I would love to I'd love to steal some time from my employer to work on critical AI resistance. We'd love to have you in our AI working group. It's a group of library workers from all different contexts who built some of the resources that I shared. We made the AI questions for vendors. We made some anti-AI stickers that went like gangbusters at ALA, critical talking points. We're working on a few other things, including teaching materials, more popular education, and as I mentioned, that survey for library workers about our experiences of AI. If you want to get involved in that, you can just contact us at info@libraryfreedom.org. And then just the last thing to share, another community building and educational opportunity that we have for critical AI resistance is our training program called Library Freedom Institute. It's a 15-week program. We put into practice a lot of the kind of critical tech information that has been covered in today's seminar. It's a group of other library workers who are also really fired up about these issues, and we learn together, we build resistance strategies together. We hear from guest speakers. We had Alex Hanna, for example, just a couple weeks ago. The next one, we haven't determined the exact dates for yet. It'll either be at the end of 2025 beginning or beginning in early 2026. And you can contact us at info@libraryfreedom.org to join the newsletter list for updates. One more link to those resources, including my slides and this dumb meme that I found. Sorry to whoever made this meme that I'm not crediting you. And then, yeah, just thanks everybody for your time. I know that I talk really fast. I'm from New Jersey. I hope that it wasn't too much to follow, but everything is in that resource list, and you can check out some of our resources at libraryfreedom.org, and always contact us at info@libraryfreedom.org to join our mailing list or learn about how to work on these things with us. Thanks so much, everybody.
Wow, great presentations, everyone. Thank you so much. Such good information and a lot to think about, a lot to chew on here. So we do still have a good chunk of time for Q&A. The session wraps up at 4:15 Eastern Time, 3:15 Central. We do have a few questions already, but if you have a question, please definitely drop it in our Q&A and we'll get to all the questions we have time for. So the first question that we have, I'm really struggling with the concept of critical use because to me, it's just the same outcome as any other use. I've been extremely hesitant to incorporate the use of any AI tools into my instruction as such. How do you make sure that critical use is actually different from regular use? Do you find that students grasp and appreciate this distinction? Great question. Anyone wants to tackle that?
Should I go first? I guess I should, right? So I'll be honest with you that I had the same question and concern. And actually when, what was it, 2022, when all of these tools kind of launched and students were using them, I did not want to use it at all. I felt strong about my opinion in not using it. But when I created this course, I felt that a lot of students were going to use it anyway. And you had to bring in these tools and show them the real life impact and the space to reflect and have conversations about it. And so, you know, a lot of them even brought up tools to me that I either heard offhand and didn't use myself. And so Perplexity, for example, one of my students wrote a whole reflection paper on like all the things you could do with Perplexity. And I'm like, well, they're going to use it. And so that's why I had to integrate it on like, how can we highlight all of these issues? Because I had students in my class who were very, very critical. And then I had students who were like, oh, well, you know, it's going to do all of these things. And so I think that it's important to highlight with students because, again, most of them are going to use it without the thought that, oh, this is what's going to happen to them. It's like doing a Google search, right? When you do a Google search, you're not thinking like, what are the implications? Like, what about the cobalt miners and, you know, in the DRC? Like, they're not thinking about those things. And so you really have to bring that to the forefront. Like, okay, I'm going to use this tool, but what are the effects and what am I using this tool for? So yeah, that's kind of how I deal with that issue. But yeah, that's a really great question. I don't know if anyone else has answers to that.
I can just say a little bit about, you know, critical information literacy is always a challenging thing to incorporate into either a class or if you're teaching like a one-off session, because you're asking them to do a lot of really complex things all at once. And unless it's really well framed, it can be challenging to get them to the level where they're actually engaging in criticality, because that's a challenging thing to do and maintain for everyone. One thing that I found sort of moderately successful is being the person who is ready to help them understand how generative AI systems work, like what are some of the technical features to it. There's been some studies about how like people are less interested in integrating or implementing AI once they actually know how they work, because in many ways, like once the magic is gone, it becomes just another, you know, technical computer system, just like any of the other ones. And so it doesn't, that is pretty deflating for the hype. But at the very least, if they're going to be critical about how they use these systems, I think they're more likely, I think we're all more likely to get to that critical place once we actually understand a lot of these different, what's the actual technical features. And that also can introduce opportunities to say like, well, you know, what does it even take to make a GPU? Now we can talk about what it takes to make a GPU. You integrate this into what you already know about how these systems function.
Great, thank you. There was a follow-up question for Caterina. Would you consider allowing students to opt out of using specific AI tools? You can see that opening some good discussion.
I hope that this is answering the question that you're asking, but if you're saying that there is a particular activity and they were asked to use a tool to create something or tried out a tool, then yes, I never got any pushback in relation to AI, which is saying something in and of itself, right? So what I told my students, the whole course was focused on intersectionality and criticality, and each week they had a reading on how these issues impact specifically people of color and gender diverse folks. And so every time I had an activity, there was a reading, right? So I wasn't just willy-nilly just creating things and asking them to do things, but really understanding like who are the voices missing here and why would we do this X, Y, and Z activity. So I allowed there in this course, there was a final project. They were allowed to use any type of technology and any topic as long as they integrated some critical aspect into their final assignment. And I think that allowed for those who did not want to use AI to focus on something else. So I had someone create a zine. So really allowing them the freedom to choose what they wanted to do in those reflection papers and final project that I had created. But again, like, no, if that were to come up, then yes, I would allow them to opt out, because the main focus of the course was conversation and reflection. So yeah, but again, there was no pushback on using the tools. They're more than happy to. So that's why I had to increase the time that we had spent on AI.
Thanks for that. There are actually two questions that kind of go together, so I'll share both. One is there a way to eradicate these annoying tools like assistants, AI-generated search results, and so on? And the other question is, coming from a fine arts environment, does anyone have suggestions for differentiating between the practice of computer art and the output of Gen AI tools, especially in discussing active visual arts practice and research? So much of art-related AI discourse is focused on copyright, which, while valuable, doesn't address fine or visual arts and art history as academic and technical fields that, as John put it, build meaning-rich skills. Is there conversation in this area that maybe I'm missing an obvious source or community for? So for anyone who would like to tackle any aspect of that, really, really good questions.
I can make a recommendation. Alexander Galloway has been doing a lot of, I mean, he does a lot of good like digital humanities work in terms of like art criticism, and he's done quite a bit on computer art. And so if you're looking for what do computer art practices look like that are distinct from Gen AI, he provides a really rich vision of what computer art can look like. I think I would want to go and put it down to the difference between, you know, the process that you're using in making something versus preparing for a product to arrive to you, which is to say there, you know, and someone in the chat had mentioned that there are like photo editing or image editing things that use machine learning. And when those are incorporated into art processes, I wouldn't necessarily put them in the same category as something like going to Dolly and asking it to make you a picture of a cat in a sweater. But instead it is involved with an artistic process where you do ask yourself the question of like, do I know what I'm doing when I work this particular thing? Or if I'm making art in this particular way, am I engaged or involved in this? So like, for instance, like ray tracing, you could go and trace someone's art. And that might be a part of an art process that someone uses to go and create things like posters and the like. But that doesn't necessarily mean that using a computer to ray trace, there are areas where you might ask questions like, well, am I doing this because this increases the rate at which I can create these so I can just pump them out and make more money? Or is this a part of the artistic process that I'm using in order to be something that's a meaningful expression of myself, my community, or ideas and values that I think are important?
Thanks, John. Any other thoughts on this question, or just tools to avoid using these things, like to make sure that Alison, I think on your slide you had that minus AI for search results. Are there other kinds of tools like that out there?
Someone dropped a link in the chat to the new, it's a Chrome extension, and I think exists for some other browsers as well. It's just like hide Google AI overviews. There's a few things like that, but I think that, to me, while those are important and I certainly use them and we promote the use of those kinds of tools, I mean, the image that we showed about removing the Google AI search results, we turned that into a sticker and we had that at ALA. And I think that they're important conversation starters, and they can be a somewhat important harm reduction approach. But I think that what we're really interested in is making systemic change against the uncritical adoption of AI. And so I just want to note that, because I think that, like, thinking about it like, oh, if I just turn this off on my search engine, and if I just show people how to turn off on my search engine, opting out is important, but it's only a drop in the bucket. We're talking about global systems of power. And so I think that the most interesting responses that I've seen, and certainly what we're trying to engage in LFP, is using those opportunities to try to engage people in something larger. We all hate that there's these automated search results. Here's how to turn it off, but like, let's not stop there.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. I especially appreciate the let's not stop there. There's a lot to be done here. So next question, how can we best address this in a library environment to our patrons or staff when we do not have the ability to provide a full course, but would want to provide programming that can guide in critical information literacy with AI? Would there be a series of programs you would offer or recommend that we offer? So just, I guess, patron programming and staff programming. Anyone would like to?
This is a lot of what we're working on in our AI working group. So if folks want to join it, if they have ideas for it, but basically thinking about what are the provocations that address what our community members are already thinking of. The AI search result one is a good example. We know anecdotally that a lot of people find this really irritating. They see it as one of the many forms of enshittification, as Cory Doctorow has talked about, the way that the internet has been degraded in all sorts of ways to like just be producing more and more slop, not doing what we want from it. So where are the opportunities to figure out where our patrons are already thinking about this stuff, and then offer them some sort of, passive resources that acknowledge their critique and help them go further with it. So this is one of the things that we're kind of moving into in this working group, is what are the popular education resources that can just be like a bookmark or a flyer that's handed out at the reference desk, or like up on the wall, or something in the form of a sticker or whatever, that is really easy for people to take and integrate and have thoughts about on their own, talk to other members of their community about.
Thank you.
I
Other
can
ideas?
answer that briefly. So not on the scale that Allison, so great, that Allison can do. But I think even in my own realm of things related to this work is, even if you don't have a course, you can do a workshop, right? Like there's a lot here that can make an impact, even if it's just an hour or so. And also, I had another idea and my brain just it just disappeared. You can host workshops, and I'm sorry, it's mom brain. I just came back from maternity leave, so I'm just
Oh,
like,
if you need a
um,
second to think, I've got a couple of thoughts.
yeah, sure. Go ahead, John.
Academic library is very different from public libraries. So in some ways, like the instructional mission of an academic library gives you some advantages in being able to do instruction and engage with instruction. I think one way too, just sort of coming from it from sort of like the art or the creation is helping people do things that they want to do that don't involve AI. That the more that people have the things that they need or want being satisfied by things that aren't AI systems, I think the more that they will feel empowered and share those practices or those experiences, then be like, well, just go to Chat GPT. Just ask Chat GPT and it'll do it for you.
Yeah, folks, it did not come back, but um, I think for those of you who are also doing, okay, it came back, for doing information literacy sessions, right? Anytime I do, even if it's a one shot, I always try to integrate something about AI and or critical information literacy, no matter what class it is for. And so even if I'm talking about Boolean searching, something like that, I always try to integrate something either at the end or at the beginning, just so that impact is there and it's not just a small group of students that are getting impacted, but every group that I'm interfacing with is getting the same message. So again, a lot on a smaller scale, but I think we can all do this effort in trying to get the word out there.
Thanks for that. I think you really highlighted the kind of intersection of this one topic with all of these, all other aspects of information literacy and media consumption. And so having that as part of the conversation, even if you're not talking specifically about AI, that seems like a great way to get that conversation going. And on that note, there's one last question or sort of a comment, I guess, that came in. I'm worried that critical adoption in my library is manifesting largely as a footnote. I mean, like, I think this person is saying, yeah, we know that there's a lot wrong with these tools, but if you want to use them, we'll equip you to do so. So I guess a question that I would ask is how to manage that, or how to sort of push forward the critical, that critical piece, and doing this with intentionality and nuance around all of that.
I'd say first invite Allison. No, sorry, Allison, you're gonna get like thousands of emails now. But seriously, work with LFP.
You're the best, Caterina. Thank you. I think, yes, come work with us for sure. Also, I think that I'm curious about what kind of role the person who asked this question, and for anyone who has this question, first of all, that environment mirrors a lot of what we're seeing in the library world, right? I think that your experience is unfortunately typical. Now, from there, what kind of power do you have within your system? Are you somebody sort of newer, paraprofessional role? Is it hard for you to take on, like, speaking up a little bit more? If that's true, who are the other people in your environment who also share critical views or could be influenced? I think it's very important that we be finding our people when it comes to resisting AI. And I mean, that's true about any kind of organizing. You got to start with who else is on your team and what kind of positions do they have, what kind of power within their system. If you are someone who feels like you don't have a lot of potential influence, are there mechanisms for feedback that you could use in an anonymous way? Could you dump the questions from our vendor question list into something that would go to your admin or whoever it is who's pushing this stuff? There are lots of ways that I think a lot of the adoption that we're seeing is happening there's a lot of reasons why it's happening, but one reason is that library workers don't tend to speak up enough when we see things happening that are bad or wrong or exploitative. And I think that we should start to exercise that muscle some more. If you need some help with figuring out how, it's something that we work on a lot in LFP.
Great, thank you. Just had one more question roll in. How would you approach faculty members who are asking for advice on how they can use AI with students?
I'll take that. I don't know if it's going to be a good answer though, but so at my institution, really consulting faculty on that particular issue, we have the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. So they kind of speak with faculty on implementation, right, on that particular area. But faculty do come to me about the other end of like trying to bring me in and talk to about AI with their students. And so let me go back to the question. Asking for advice, how they could use AI with the students. I've never just given tips like in an email and just like sent it off. Like anytime I have this type of conversation, I always do it in the classroom. So I would invite you possibly to maybe set up a meeting with that faculty person if they really want to have this conversation. I like one-on-one conversations a lot. And so if they'll say, oh, can you talk about AI? Say, okay, well, what is the goal here? Like, why are we bringing this in? And then, you know, what tools are you planning to use, or what do you want to talk about? And I had a very wonderful critical conversation with some graduate students last year. I was brought in and I talked about, you know, regular information literacy stuff. And then I also brought in AI. And we had a great, I mean, we talked about, you know, ethical, you know, ethics issues for like probably most of the hour hour and a half that I was there. And so, you know, students want to have these conversations. And I think a faculty member who's open to having that conversation, it's kind of like you can come in kind of and bring awareness to all of the problems that we've discussed here today. I don't know, you know, the background of these particular faculty members, if they're like, you know, gung-ho, but this is a way also to educate them as well about what can happen with this, you know, explosion of generative AI tools. And there's like a new one every day. So I think having this conversation is very important. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks for that. Any other thoughts on this?
I think sort of just like extending that the opportunities to collaborate with faculty, those are really great places, not just to go and you know ensure that you're serving that role in the library as someone who's expanding the information literacy all told, but also is an opportunity to connect with other people that might have maybe like a different avenue in which they could advocate. So if you know, I think that there is something in with that collaboration where you're able to go and start to make connections with people as well. I saw something on the chat who has a really great answer to this as well about letting your position be known and making that an opportunity to go and have those critical conversations with a faculty member.
Just one more thing to add, which is that I think there's a lot of opportunity to find out what, like, it's been said a little bit already, but like, what is this person's position? What are they asking this for? Is it from a place of insecurity, of feeling like I have to adopt these tools, I have to teach my students, or because of inevitability or FOMO fears? Can you do a little more of a reference interview with them and interrogate what their motivations are, and then try to use that to not only let them know what your position is, but to offer them some alternative type resources rather than just assuming that they're someone who wants this too. They're faculty, they're probably in some precarious type labor position. Even tenured faculty are much more precarious now because of the attacks on higher education. And so I think that that's something like we should have that labor analysis when we're responding to questions like this as well.
Great, thank you. We're just about out of time, but there was one last question. How do you recommend pushing back against the sentiment of AI has been here and in use since the 90s, completely dismissive of any and all concerns brought up about the ethics of Gen AI use specifically? You know, just a little light topic to end things.
I mean, there's all sorts of ways that people want to use like whataboutism or various kinds of thought terminating cliches. What I would say to that person is actually AI's been around since the 1950s, and that doesn't mean anything, right? Murder has been around for centuries. Like what do you mean? You know, we're talking about the impact in our current environment right now. We're talking about the massive explosion of these technologies, the you know, ongoing venture capital support from Gulf oil money, from, you know, we're talking about the acceleration of resource extraction and demands on the environment for the sake of propping up, for the sake of like trying to make some money off these tools that have been supported by venture capital. So I'm just not buying, like, I don't know, what is this person trying to say? It doesn't matter. Sorry, that was a totally rambly and angry response, but yeah. Say the thing about the 1950s. J.C.R. Licklider came up with the concept of the thinking machines decades ago. It's been an ongoing project. Who cares?
Yeah, and the history of cybernetics too, about going and making sure that like flak cannons can properly hit a moving bomber with human interaction. Yeah, these things have been around for a long time, and they've always had deep ethical implications. So let's actually have this conversation. Let's engage with these ethical questions. Just because it's happened before doesn't mean it's okay.
Great. Any last thoughts? All right. Well, I want to thank you to all of our presenters, and thanks to everyone who came out for this session. I also want to thank the SRRT team for handling tech and chat. SRRT is committed to ensuring that all of our programs are diverse, inclusive, and free for attendees. To do that, we rely on support from ALA, membership, and direct donations. You can help champion our roundtable's mission by donating at the link provided and or joining SRRT as a member. With that link, you can make a general gift or select the SRRT task force or the award that you wish to support. Please help us maintain our high quality programming, core values that sustain it, and our commitment to accessibility by making a donation, becoming a SRRT member, or helping to spread the word about our roundtable and events. And thank you again. This was fantastic. Thanks, everyone.